Let's start with a phrase that nobody questions, but everyone uses. They're just not a culture fit.
It sounds thoughtful, right? It
Mhm.
sounds kind of like final. It sounds like you perhaps made a very smart and well-considered decision.
But if we actually paused and asked, what does that mean?
Yeah, we would hear things like, they didn't really click with me. They felt off. I can't put my finger on it, my personal favorite.
Yeah. And that's the problem. If you can't define it, you're not evaluating it, you're reacting to it.
And culture fit has basically become the professional version of vibes were off. Something felt weird. It's nothing more than that.
Right. And so many people are making hiring decisions based on that. So let's talk about it today.
Welcome to Don't Tell Me About Yourself, the podcast where old school hiring meets a modern reality check.
I'm Lorna Erickson.
And I'm Victoria Gates, and we're the co-founders of Expert Interviewers.
Between the two of us, we've got 40 years of hiring experience. We've studied interviewing techniques. We've trained thousands of people globally to stop making the same mistakes over and over again.
And we've got 340,000 people following us online because apparently everyone has a story about a bad interview. You know the ones. The illegal questions, the 45-minute monologues, showing up late with no apology.
So every week, we're tackling the biggest subjects in hiring.
We bring real stories, real data, and real talk about how to make interviews actually work for everyone.
Because great hiring isn't luck, it's a practice skill. So whether you hire, apply, or just love a good interview train wreck, the show is for you.
Well, before we tear this apart, like limb for limb, because I feel like that's what's coming.
That's what's coming. Yeah, you can feel like the momentum building here.
Yeah. I do think we can acknowledge that culture at companies does matter. Like it does, right? We can acknowledge that. And we can give people that.
Sure. I want to work in a company that has a good culture. Like I can say that simply.
Yeah.
So I agree. It does matter.
So the concept doesn't need to be thrown out. And in fact, like when we looked into this topic and have been down this rabbit hole in the past, we know that this is important to companies and candidates. In fact, 88% of employers say that culture fit is important in hiring decisions because we know candidates and employers both care about it. And when there's a culture alignment, when the candidate and the employer are happy with the fit, you do see higher engagement from employees. You see a stronger performance. We know that's proven. And job satisfaction goes through the roof, right? But when it's wrong, that can cost you big money, right? Like I feel like it's a huge cost. And that's probably why people hold it so dear, would you say?
I would say that. Yeah. And it's interesting that when it goes wrong, like what you just mentioned, they're saying it's because the person wasn't a culture fit. Like that's what they're saying, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What we're saying is like, you're not wrong to care about this, but if you're not defining it consistently, that's where things are starting to break down, right? So that's where we have a beef.
Totally. Yeah.
So when you say like, let's break down like what culture fit actually means, that's what we're saying is the issue because we don't know and we're all defining it separately, right?
Right. Yeah. This person did extremely well because they were a culture fit. They didn't do well because they weren't a culture fit. Like that's not really going to help you moving forward just by defining it that way.
I think about that layer underneath the culture fit. To me, it's so much bias, right? Like it's just screaming bias and it's screaming like, they're not like me. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel familiar. Right?
Yeah. It's that similarity bias. It's do they talk like me, act like me, have a similar background to me? That's where people get stuck in that ridge of culture fit. It's like it has to fit what we currently have. And it's very short-sighted.
Yeah. Well, and usually it's people that are different than you that you're feeling uncomfortable, like someone communicates differently or you don't have things in common or oftentimes, and it sounds like when you say, oh, I didn't get a good feeling about this person, it can sound really decisive, like you know what you're talking about. And it kind of sounds like it even might be job related.
Totally.
It's not.
Right. It's not job related.
Right.
Yeah. So I should probably take this moment to give a personal example of this. I was like in my first job out of college, it was a big company, but we had small little teams. So there were 3 of us on one team and I'd worked at the company for a couple months and my manager hired somebody who was the exact opposite of me. Everyone else at the company kind of felt like me, former athlete, competitive, extroverted, all the things. And then I will not name names. This person ended up being one of my close friends. But when they hired my partner, I remember thinking, this guy's never going to fit into our culture, ever. He had like really thick glasses. He was fighting for his life, like every day from allergies and high pollen counts. He was literally growing sea monkeys on his desk. And I was just like, how is this going to work? And I remember going to my manager and saying, can he work for someone else? Why did you hire this person? And that was a really good indication that I was in no way ready to be a hiring leader or someone to be able to define what culture fit actually meant. Fast forward 6 months later, he surpassed me in every possible goal that was ever put in front of us. And he ended up staying with the company for 16 years and making them over $15 million in gross revenue. So that's a really personal story of how when you think someone doesn't fit a culture, they very well could fit it better than you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting too about your story is like, obviously you don't know what you don't know, but in that instance, I think it's really hard to push back when someone throws out this culture fit. It's something that people just don't push back on. They just kind of go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And it creates this bigger issue because to your point, if they never hired that person and they only hired people like you, they would be missing that $15 million. They might have some other revenue, but they would be missing that. So it's an opportunity cost there that you're giving up just by accepting that culture fit objection.
Right. That's
Yeah.
right.
So it
And I
creates a
think
bigger issue.
it totally does. And I think the best leaders for companies are going to be the ones that can take time to define what culture fit actually means. And it's not going to be nearly as exclusive as it is for some companies.
Yeah, absolutely. Like just relying on that without defining it. Like it just to me feels extremely short-sighted. And I also think it's an indication that your process is crappy. Like your process is not good. It's weak. You're not good at
Right.
interviewing because if if you're like, yeah, everything was good, but I just don't think they're going to be a culture fit. What are we doing here? Like,
Right.
what
Yes.
are we doing here? All you're judging is your impressions, your opinions,
Yep.
and we're labeling that as being fit. We're saying that
Right.
that is a fit and it's not. What is a fit is, can they do the job? Do they want to do your job? And
Yep.
are those things aligned for both parties? That is
Right.
fit,
Yeah.
not impressions.
It is. Yeah. Familiarity doesn't mean that this person's going to be effective in their job. And we were just talking with some partners in our industry recently that said that like didn't get a good gut feeling about someone or they weren't a culture fit is
Yep.
not defensible in court
Yep. Yeah.
either. So it's like, if you can't explain this, then it's not legal. Like you have to be able to explain why a
Mhm.
candidate is or isn't a fit, and it can't be related to them not liking soccer or,
Yeah.
who knows
You're
whatever
so
else they can
right.
throw in there.
It's so interesting. And, if you can't explain your decision, then should you be making that decision in the first place, right? Is kind
Yeah.
of where we come from. And I think that just introduces an enormous amount of risk that is unnecessary, in my
Yeah.
opinion. And it's creating a culture of interviewing where, as a candidate, what am I
Mhm.
then going to do? Well, I'm going
Yeah.
to look up the culture at your company through the numerous social media channels I can find it on. And then I am just going to pretend and
Mhm.
become an actress and pretend like
Right.
I'm a fit, even if I'm not,
Yeah.
because I know that you're bad at interviewing. And if I do that, I can get an offer and then I get to make the decision. So I'm going to
Sure.
act like I'm a fit, even if I'm not. I'm going to mirror how you speak. I'm going to say I
Yeah.
like the things you like. I'm going to stroke your ego by looking you up on LinkedIn beforehand. And then I'm going to make sure I talk about something that's on there. And I don't blame candidates one bit for it because
No
we're
way.
setting them up to do that.
Yeah. No, you can't hate the player. You gotta hate the game, There's so much information about companies now on social media. You can look up some of that stuff about how they define their culture, but also if you're only meeting with the same kinds of people over and over again throughout the company and you're noticing that it's not extremely diverse, you're going to do what you can to fit
Mm-hmm.
in, whether it's aligned or not.
Yeah. So you're not even hiring the best person for the job, the person who's going to perform the best. You're just hiring the person who was best at interviewing.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
tricking you in the interview in some ways. And again,
that's
candidates,
right.
we do not blame you. Keep on
No,
keeping
no,
on.
no. Yeah,
We're
you
doing it to
you do
ourselves.
you.
We talked about some of the opportunity costs with your partner, but there's some other costs that I think about too with like turnover. So if you're hiring for one type of culture and let's say that culture sours, right? That can cause significant turnover, which is crazy, crazy
And
cost for you as well.
yeah, you're putting all your eggs in that one culture basket. And instead, and instead, it's like, how are you identifying gaps in your team?
Yeah.
It's short-sighted.
So
We
why do
talked
you think, because we've been interviewing
about.
2 decades each almost at this point, and we've
Right.
interviewed thousands of people. Why has culture fit been such a
Yeah.
consistent phrase and used for so long?
If a leader in your company confidently says that person is or isn't a culture fit, there's just blind trust and people are
Mhm.
just following that.
It sounds a heck of a lot better than you saying, "I just like this person more," or "I didn't really
Yeah,
like this person as much." It's a more it sounds professional, it sounds
totally.
measured. It
Yeah.
gives it, like, credibility
Yeah.
to something that has no credibility, in fact. And you know
Yeah.
what? I blame some of the LinkedIn lingo that we hear. Oh my
Mhm.
god. Let me give you a phrase and see what your reaction is. When they say, "As a leader, I'm a culture keeper."
Oh,
We've
neat.
empowered these leaders to think that they're in charge of this, right? Like this
Right.
is, and then so they think that they're then the judge, jury, and executioner of who's a culture fit and who's not because I'm the
Yeah,
keeper of the culture. And to
totally.
me, I just think like, yuck, first of all,
Mm,
you should be fostering culture and engagement and like contributing to it
right.
and encouraging it, but you are not some keeper of it. You are not in
Totally.
charge. You are not the gatekeeper of what's
Yeah.
allowed and what's not. It's just yucky.
Yeah, more often I've seen culture be exclusive rather than inclusive. And I think that is one of the biggest issues, but companies keep using it because it is faster to say
Yeah.
somebody's not a culture fit than to actually define what your culture is and where you want it to be someday.
Yeah. And we said it early on. They're not wrong for caring about culture. Culture is important. But
Right.
when you're using it as a decision for who you're hiring and who you're not, that's where you're going wrong. Like the way you're
Yeah.
measuring it just isn't matching up because it feels safe. You feel like you're managing risk by keeping
Yeah.
out people who don't match up. But you could actually be, to your point, excluding people,
Yeah.
right? Like your partner who could
Yeah.
add a ton of value on this sort of undefined personality opinion based
Yeah.
decision making skill. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. It's just an unnecessary blinder that companies keep on. Like they
Yeah.
don't need to. They let
Yeah.
them go.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because the reality is like you could hire someone who's like the perfect culture fit, right? Like
Yeah.
100% we vibe, we mesh, and they suck at the job and they
Yeah.
are bad performers. That is absolutely a huge part of it, right?
Yes. Do you remember when we were doing our case study, there were many times where we would recommend them not hiring somebody, which is a hard thing for a recruiter to do, mind you, because
Yes.
recruiters are typically paid either per placement or whatever. So
Yeah.
it's hard when you're telling a hiring manager, I don't recommend you hire this person. They're like, you know what?
Mhm.
They're a culture fit. I'm going to do it. And when you track that person's success, that's where a lot of the hiring mistakes were actually made, is that
Mhm.
they were hiring someone that felt good, that aligned with the culture, and they had no other evidence behind that. Those are the ones that left after a few months or got fired for underperformance.
Yeah.
They were blinded by the culture fit.
It is easy. We call them like shining stars, I think, in some of our
Mm,
interviews that we've done. Like, it is easy to get dazzled, and we understand that, right? That's a natural human quality to be dazzled by someone who you click with and who you enjoy. And that's okay.
right.
Be dazzled, but also make sure you have an interview process that evaluates the critical things that are important to your company. Because just because you like someone
Yeah.
doesn't mean they'll be a perfect fit long
Right.
term, doesn't mean they'll perform. And just because you don't like someone doesn't mean that the opposite isn't true, right?
Yeah.
So I think
Right.
if you over index on that, that's where the issue comes in. Like you're going to get teams that feel really good, that you
Right.
get along with, that y'all have a good time, but the bottom line of the company is not showing that. You're not
Yeah.
performing. So that's
Exactly.
not the goal of any company out there.
It's not. No, I know as much as you want to hire your best friend,
Yeah.
that's not going to be the case. You want the company to succeed. That's why we're all
Yeah.
there, is to make money. And
Right.
eventually you might find you mesh with that person, like I did with my buddy. Like we
You're
were
so
buddies
right.
for years.
No, I see a term everywhere and people talk about like personality hire all the time.
Yeah,
Would you put that in this bucket somewhere? Like, I'm just curious. Like,
I
I was
do.
just thinking
Do
about it.
you?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
But
I think that
you
is
could
the
still,
personality hire.
yeah, but you could still have a personality hire that also can and wants to do the job, right? Like, that's where I look into it in some ways, or can you not?
Hmm.
I know. That's what I'm wondering.
That
It's a
is a
good
good
question.
question. So can it be both? Because we know it is for sure. We know that personality fit is a culture fit, but could they also be both? I mean, I guess they could. I mean, that would be
I'm just curious because
Best they
personality hire is
could.
such a thing. It's like trending. We see videos about it all the time,
Right.
everywhere. And it's a funny, I always laugh at the content because it is funny, but I do find that that probably was someone who was hired for a culture fit, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just, to me, I was
Okay.
just wondering if, I'm guessing that it's probably rare, but it can
Yeah.
happen that they're all of those things.
Okay.
And I
Yep.
think if culture fit is your primary, right, decision point, then that's where the personality hire can go wrong.
Yeah.
But if you're hiring for those other things and you happen to also hire someone who can be considered a personality hire, I think that that just ends up being probably the exception, not the rule.
Sure. That's a great way of saying it.
There was a period of time where I was really obsessed with the idea of
Mm.
saying culture add instead of culture fit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk to me about that because I
Yeah.
don't know how I feel about that anymore.
I know. My initial knee-jerk reaction is to say that culture fit is dead, culture add is the new way,
Yeah.
And I think it's due to a little bit of impatience of people not taking time to reframe what culture fit actually means to them. So
Yeah.
if we kill it and then remarket it as culture add and make people sit down and think about our team has all of these skill sets. In order for us to be a really well-rounded team, we need to be intentional and focus on adding these additional skill sets. Like, I feel like
Sure.
if you killed it and then rebranded it and then made people actually do the work, it would work better. So that's my like
Sure.
that's my reasoning for wanting culture fit to be dead. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I think what you're saying is like culture fit is like sort of bad. Better would be
Mhm.
like, do they align to our values? Do we share things in common? Do they like to hold each other accountable? Do they like the
Right.
pace of what work we have? Do they take ownership, et
Right.
cetera? Like the sort of defined characteristic of value alignment is sort of better. And then what you're
Yeah.
saying is that next level, which I see is like, will they make us better? Will they, not only do they align on our values, but then
Yeah.
also they're adding to that. They're making us better and we're
Yeah.
actually stronger because of them. But you have to really you have to know yourself. You have
Totally.
to know your team. You have to be set up for success in order to look for that, in my opinion.
I think that as you were walking through that, I was thinking, that middle piece where you're like, it's better. I do think that that is if people's motivators align. Because
Yeah.
when you talk about culture fit, like the things that you were starting to name off, it
Hmm.
sounded to me like motivational fit.
Yeah.
And so if you can get the motivational fit aligned and then you make sure that they can do the base level of the job and you're also strategically hiring for what your team needs right now. I mean, that's like the trifecta of perfectness right there.
Yeah.
You're not just focused on where you're at, but where you want to be. And those are the companies that are going to get it right and have
Yeah.
an inclusive culture that's moving forward and not staying stagnant.
Yeah, we need to look at behaviors. We need to look at what they've done, what they want, what they liked or disliked about their
For
prior jobs. So we're
sure.
basically just like taking those things and making them into behaviors, right? We're taking that
Yeah.
and just making it tangible,
Yep.
defining those things, right?
Right. Because
Yeah.
then at that point, fit glasses don't matter. Sea monkeys don't matter.
Yeah.
Gender, age, none of those things matter if you're doing it that way.
We were just talking about this. Know something's gone wrong when we
Mhm.
hear someone say in interview feedback, ugh, they weren't a culture fit, right? And instead, what we want to hear is someone saying, we didn't see evidence of XYZ in their background, or
Yeah.
this role requires this, and we did
Yeah.
not hear that in their examples. And that's the difference. The
Totally.
difference is it's evidence-based, it's based on something that they said or shared, and it is not just some generic, vague term, right? And
Yeah.
that's how, for the recruiters on this call, for the hiring managers and the hiring teams, that's how you know is that when you're hearing they're just not a culture fit, period, end of sentence,
Right.
that's where you need to go, okay, well, help me understand. Where did you learn that?
Yeah.
Where did you hear that? What
Yep.
examples did they give that led you to reach that conclusion? That is the
Exactly.
follow-up that's needed because that's the real feedback. That's
Right.
something you can actually compare. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if they don't have those answers yet, you have to set them up for the next interview then. You have to make sure that they're ready
Right.
to go for the next
And
one.
that's
It's like, okay,
okay.
it is
It's
okay.
okay.
Yeah. It's got to be a learning experience. And this is like interview processes don't get better with one conversation.
Right.
It's poking them and prodding them at every feedback session you have about a candidate, you're
Mhm.
planting a seed. You're planting a seed. And then hopefully, eventually, it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years. that hiring manager is finally starting to get it. It's like, whoa, this recruiter is going to be asking me for specific information
Yeah.
about the examples that this candidate did or didn't do, and I need to be ready for it.
Okay. If I'm a candidate and I'm interviewing and I'm sitting in an interview and I'm hearing a hiring manager go on and on about culture for a
Yeah.
long time, like all the great culture we have pizza parties and we go out to happy hours and,
Yeah.
we like to party, like whatever. To me, like I feel like I would start to go, okay, like if I like that, okay, fine. But like
Mhm.
also, I'm just wondering, are there things that candidates can look out for as well as it relates to culture fit? Because we're talking a lot about the hiring managers and the employer side.
Yeah.
I'm just curious what you think
Well,
about that.
I think you nailed it. Is that depending on what happens in that interview, you're going to know if you're being evaluated for your skills or evaluated for your similarities,
Yeah.
And
For
some
better or
some
for worse.
for better or for worse. I shadowed an interview once for a mid-level manager that had been thrown into the interview process. And I was
Wow.
sitting in the room watching this interview going off, and the candidate walks in, hands the resume over. He he puts the resume down, face down on the desk, and says, "I don't care what's on your resume. I just want to know if you can hang." Mm, okay. All right.
Hang.
Now, if I were that candidate, just run. Now, granted, it was one bad egg of a hiring manager in this company, but still, it's like that's who you're going to be working with on a daily basis. Like that would have
Yeah.
been you would have been on that person's team.
Well, but maybe that candidate just likes to hang.
Maybe you're right. I shouldn't assume that candidate doesn't want to hang. That's on me.
I mean, I don't know anyone who would respond that way, but I mean, it is pretty funny. I think
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like if we can sort of like, what do we say, reduce it down to the like three things we're talking about. It's like A, culture fit, bad, like
Yeah.
not something that we want to make decisions off of. Like we've
Right.
said that we've kind of like come for it, but like you do still need to consider culture and define your culture with
Yeah.
behaviors. Like that's the first thing we're saying.
Yeah. Behaviors and motivators. I think those are fine to
Yeah.
define your culture on those
Yeah.
two things. Yep.
Yeah. And then sort of separate some of the vagueness, the personality components that needs to be sort of separated out and looking for evidence. I think that's a main piece of it as well.
I agree.
And
Yes.
stop letting vibes make your decisions, period.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You can do better, and we believe in you.
Because I do think as much as we rag on some of these things, references, culture fit, like these things, like culture matters, of course.
Right.
Culture fit is just subjective. So
Yeah.
how do you, just like anything, how do you distill that to be something that you can measure?
So the next time you hear not a culture fit,
Ask someone, well, what evidence are we basing that off of exactly?
the best question. Thanks for listening today. Happy interviewing, everyone. See you next time.